It was a Sunday evening, quiet and ordinary, until it wasn't. The smell of roast chicken filled the house, the kind that once made me feel like I belonged somewhere. I stood at the edge of the table, heart pounding like a war drum, and said it. Just 3 words. I'm pregnant. My voice cracked halfway through, but I said it anyway. I was scared, but I still hoped they'd see their daughter. Not a mistake. My father didn't even flinch. He shoved his chair back like I'd set fire to the room. And then the yelling started. You're not our daughter. You're a disgrace. A filthy whore. I remember the sting of those words more than the silence that followed. My mother just sat there, staring at the wall, not at me. That silence cut deeper than his shouting ever could. I begged with my eyes, just for her to say something, anything. But all I got was her folded hands and a tear that never fell. They told me to get out. That same night. No bag, no plan, just the weight of shame that wasn't mine to carry. I ended up on a friend's couch, curled around my belly like a broken shield. I whispered to the tiny heartbeat inside me, "You will be loved, even if I have to rebuild everything from nothing." The first night away from home felt like waking up inside a nightmare I hadn't agreed to. I lay on that lumpy old couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of someone else's refrigerator. Everything felt foreign, except the ache inside me. Not just physical, but a soul-deep heaviness I couldn't shake. I kept replaying his words, trying to make them make sense, as if I could rearrange them into something less cruel. But they meant every word. That much was clear. I was no longer a daughter, no longer family, just a mistake too big for forgiveness. My friend's apartment smelled like vanilla and laundry detergent. It should have comforted me, but instead it made me feel like an intruder in a world that kept moving while mine collapsed. Every hour felt like a year. Every kick in my belly reminded me that I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had no home, no plan, no money. Just a belly full of hope and fear wrestling for space. And yet, even in the thickest part of that grief, I made a silent promise. I would not let my child grow up believing she was unwanted. I didn't have the answers yet, but I had fire in my chest. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start climbing out of the wreckage they left me in. Mornings were the hardest. Waking up before sunrise, pretending I wasn't terrified. I'd stare out the window, watch the world begin again, and wonder if I ever would. Some days, I felt like a ghost, invisible, floating through someone else's life. But every time I felt like giving in to the pain, I'd place my hands on my belly and remind myself, she's coming, and she deserves better than this. She deserves everything they refuse to give me. I started making lists, not of dreams, not yet, but of necessities. A job, a roof, a doctor who wouldn't judge me. I walked into every corner store, every diner, every hole-in-the-wall office asking for work. Sometimes they said no before I even spoke. Sometimes they looked at my stomach like it was a ticking bomb. But one manager at a laundromat said yes, part-time, cash only. It wasn't much, but it was something. I worked days, napped in stolen pockets of time, and cried when no one was looking. I learned how to stretch $10 for a week, how to fake a smile so people wouldn't ask questions. But most of all, I learned how strong desperation can make you. I was still hurting, still bleeding from wounds no one could see. But I was moving. And with every tired step forward, I knew I was walking toward something better. The day Emma was born, the world finally felt still. After months of noise, judgment, fear, exhaustion, there was this sudden, breathtaking silence. I held her against my chest, and everything faded. The shame, the loneliness, even my parents' words. She blinked up at me with eyes too wise for a newborn, like she already knew the battles we'd fought just to meet. And I remember thinking, this is the beginning. not the end they tried to force on me. We went home, or rather, back to that borrowed room, with a bag of secondhand baby clothes and a heart full of promises. I didn't have a crib, so I used a laundry basket lined with blankets. She didn't seem to mind. Every cry, every diaper change, every 2 a.m. Feeding, I answered like it was my sacred duty. I wasn't just raising a child, I was rebuilding myself. One bottle, one lullaby, one sleepless night at a time. During the day, I worked jobs no one else wanted, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, watching other people's children. At night, I studied with one hand and held Emma with the other. I couldn't afford college back then, but I found online classes and community programs. I scraped together every ounce of energy I had. There were days I barely ate, just made sure she did. I was exhausted. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't lost. I had purpose. Years passed in quiet hustle. Emma learned her first words in a thrift store high chair while I filled out job applications on a borrowed laptop. I remember her tiny voice saying "mama" for the first time, and how that word stitched up something broken in me. I still worked nights, still studied between laundry cycles and lullabies. Slowly, painfully, I chipped away at the mountain in front of me. One day, I finally got my GED. I sobbed in the parking lot like I'd won a war. With that paper in hand, doors I thought were bolted shut began to crack open. I enrolled in community college, pushed through every assignment with coffee and stubborn hope. Emma was my study partner, coloring while I read textbooks out loud to her. We made a game out of flashcards. She'd giggle every time I got one wrong, and I swear, her laughter kept me sane. I wasn't just building a future. I was showing her how to fight for one. By the time I graduated, I felt like I had climbed Everest barefoot. I didn't walk across that stage, I soared. And Emma, now 7, stood in the front row clapping like I was a rock star. I took that degree and turned it into a small business, something mine, something earned. I opened a little wellness studio downtown. Nothing fancy, just clean floors, calming music, and walls lined with hard-won hope. For the first time, we weren't just surviving, we were living. Somewhere along the way, love found me. Not the kind I used to dream about. No grand gestures, no whirlwind romance, just quiet, steady kindness. Daniel walked into my life like sunlight through a window I didn't know I'd left open. He never tried to fix me. He just listened. He made dinner when I was too tired to stand. He laughed with Emma like she was already his. And before I knew it, we were a family. One I chose, not one I survived. We got married in our backyard, under strings of borrowed lights and a sky full of stars. Emma was our flower girl, tossing petals like confetti dreams. There were no fancy dresses, no photographers, just laughter, music, and love so honest it felt sacred. I looked around at that little gathering and realized, this is the home I always needed. A place where no one walks out when things get hard. A place where mistakes aren't punishable by exile. I decorated our home with things that told stories, hand-painted frames, secondhand books, Emma's drawings. Our kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. We had slow Sundays and noisy breakfasts and hugs for no reason. I'd catch myself staring at it all sometimes, overwhelmed by the quiet beauty of what we'd built. They threw me away like I was nothing. But brick by brick, I created a life no shame could touch. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels urgent. I was folding laundry, humming to myself, Emma's school shoes drying by the door. The number was unfamiliar, and for a second I almost let it ring. But something made me answer. Maybe intuition, maybe habit, maybe fate reaching through the cracks of my carefully built peace. The voice on the other end made my blood run cold. Anna. It's Dad. Just like that. No apology, no hesitation. Just his voice, aged and brittle, like time had finally humbled him. He said he was sick, that they were in trouble, that the bills were stacking higher than their pride. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring at a pair of tiny socks in my hands, feeling like I'd fallen through the floor. The same man who once called me a whore, now calling me daughter again? He begged, not loudly, but with the quiet desperation of someone drowning. "We're going to lose the house," he said. "Your mother's scared. I'm scared." I listened, heart pounding, eyes locked on the photo of Emma on the fridge. My daughter. My reason. My proof that love could be louder than shame. And when he whispered, "You're still our daughter," something inside me split in two. I took a breath, then said, "Now I'm your daughter? Interesting." He kept talking, throwing out memories like lifelines. "Remember your 5th birthday? The cake your mom made from scratch? The pink bicycle?" As if a few childhood snapshots could erase the night they shoved me into the cold with nothing but shame. I let him speak. I let him drown in his own words. But I didn't offer a rope. Because part of me needed to hear it. Needed him to say out loud what he had done in silence for years. He mentioned doctors, medications, mortgage notices. I could hear his breath catching, like pride was still clinging to his throat. For a man who once screamed that I wasn't his daughter, he was suddenly very fluent in the language of family. I stood there, arms crossed, letting the silence press down on him like the weight of everything he never said when I needed him. He asked, "Can we talk in person?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was warring with itself. And then I thought of Emma. Of what I'd tell her if she were in my shoes one day. I didn't owe them kindness, but I owed myself closure. "Fine," I said. Just that. No promises, no softness, just the word. I hung up and stood still for a long time, letting the past creep up my spine like cold air. I didn't know what I'd find when I saw them again, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer the girl they threw away. That night, I lay in bed beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling while the shadows shifted across the room. I told him about the call, about my father's voice, that ghost from another life. He didn't push me to decide. He just took my hand, gently, like always, and said, "Whatever you choose, make sure it's for your peace, not their comfort." That stayed with me, because I wasn't the scared girl on a stranger's couch anymore. I was a woman who'd built her own foundation from the dust they left behind. Emma walked in the next morning, still in her pajamas, holding a crayon drawing of our house, sunny windows, flowers, stick figures smiling, and I thought, this is the home I always dreamed of. I bent down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood I never had. I knew I had to face them, not for revenge, not even for closure maybe, but to stand in that space as the woman they didn't believe I could become. So I told Daniel I'd go, just one visit, just to see. I wasn't sure what I wanted out of it, an apology, an explanation, maybe nothing at all, but part of me needed to witness their unraveling, if only to remember how far I'd come. I packed light, but my heart felt heavy. This wasn't a reunion. This was a reckoning. And I didn't know what I'd find when I walked through that old front door. The driveway looked smaller than I remembered. The weeds had claimed the edges, curling around the cracked concrete like fingers pulling everything back down. The porch steps groaned under my weight, or maybe under the weight of everything unsaid. I stood at the door for a full minute before knocking. My hand hovered, my breath caught. Then I knocked once, twice. Sharp and certain. The door creaked open before I could knock a third time. My mother stood there, older than I expected, thinner. Tired. Her eyes widened like she was seeing a ghost, and maybe she was. "Anna," she whispered, reaching out like I might disappear again. I didn't move. I let her look at me, let her see what she'd missed. She stepped aside, and I walked into the house I once called home. It smelled like dust and boiled cabbage, with a faint trace of antiseptic, the scent of fading things. The living room was dim. The furniture sagged. The curtains hadn't changed. And there, in a worn recliner, sat my father, sunken, pale, oxygen tube at his nose. He looked up at me like I was salvation, not the daughter he disowned. "Anna," he rasped. "Thank God." I didn't speak. I took it all in. The silence, the walls, the ghosts. This house, once filled with rules and shame, now sat hollow in front of me. And still, they wanted something. My mother gestured toward the couch, like this was some ordinary visit, like we might sip tea and talk about the weather. I didn't sit. I stayed standing, tall, calm, unshakable. My father's voice broke the awkward pause. "We've made mistakes," he said, coughing between syllables. "But we're still family. Blood is blood, Anna." I looked at him, really looked. The man who once kicked me out, now drowning in his own regrets, and yet, somehow, still expecting grace. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" I asked, my voice low, steady. "Because I do. Every single word." My mother finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "We didn't know what to do. We were ashamed." I turned to her, and my words came sharper than I intended. "You were ashamed of me. Not for me." Her lip trembled, but I felt no satisfaction in that. Just confirmation of how alone I truly had been. He tried to reach for my hand, the same one he wouldn't even let back in the house 19 years ago. I pulled it away before he touched me. "You said I wasn't your daughter, and I believed you. I buried the girl who begged for your love that night. Their tears came then, but they weren't mine to carry. I had cried enough for all of us. I stared at the people who should have protected me and felt nothing. Just the weight of old echoes and a single rising clarity. I walked through the house one last time, past the photos that never included Emma, past the kitchen where silence once screamed louder than words. Every corner held a version of me I had to outgrow. And as I reached the door, my father's voice cracked behind me. "Don't turn your back on us." I paused, hand on the doorknob, the air thick with all the years they chose absence. I turned, not with anger, but with something colder. Clarity. "You turned your back on me first," I said, meeting his eyes. "When I was scared. When I was young. When I needed you." His shoulders sagged. He didn't argue, maybe because he finally knew there was no defense for what he'd done. My mother sat crumpled on the edge of the couch, face in her hands. But no one stopped me this time. No yelling, no blaming, just silence. The kind that comes after a storm has taken everything. I stepped outside and shut the door gently, not out of kindness, but finality. I didn't slam it. That would have implied passion. What I felt was release. I didn't owe them forgiveness. I didn't owe them money. I didn't owe them anything. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter. Not vindicated, just free. And I knew deep in my bones that walking away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. And it was long overdue. When I walked through my own front door, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years of shadows. Emma was the first to greet me, arms flung around my waist, her cheek pressed against my side like she never doubted I'd come home. Daniel stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, eyes filled with quiet understanding. No questions, just presence. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic and everything safe. This was family. I hugged Emma tighter than usual, maybe because I needed to feel something real after being wrapped in the coldness of my past. She pulled back, squinting up at me. "Did you see Grandma and Grandpa?" I nodded. She didn't ask what they said. She just took my hand and led me to the table, like that was enough. And honestly, it was. The people who truly love you don't need explanations. They just stay. Later that evening, Emma came into the living room holding a wrinkled piece of construction paper. "I made this at school," she said, beaming. It was a drawing of me. Curly hair, big smile, a superhero cape. At the top, she'd written in shaky letters, "My hero." My throat tightened. I stared at that paper and realized something so deep it almost knocked the air from my chest. They had rejected me, but I had become everything they never were, and everything she needed me to be. I tucked her drawing into my journal that night, like it was gold. Because it was. It was proof, not just of who I'd become, but of how far I'd come. I thought about the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was enough, if I'd ruined my life, if I could ever be a good mother without having one. And now, here I was, being called a hero by the very reason I survived. Sometimes healing doesn't come in grand moments. Sometimes it comes in crayon and misspelled words. Daniel poured me a glass of wine and sat beside me on the couch, the kind of silence between us that feels like comfort, not distance. "You okay?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I just looked around at the home we'd built, the soft lighting, the laughter upstairs, the smell of cookies cooling on the counter. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I really am." Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in my life, I knew what love actually looked like. We talked late into the night, the way we do when the world feels gentle. I told him I didn't give them a cent. He just nodded. He understood. "You gave them something more powerful," he said. "Your absence." That stuck with me. Sometimes walking away is the loudest message you can send. I didn't go back to punish them. I went to remind myself that I never needed their approval to become whole. I had rewritten my story, and this time, I was the author. That weekend, Emma and I planted flowers in the front yard. Marigolds, her favorite. She wore her little sun hat and asked if we could paint the mailbox purple. I laughed and said, "Why not?" The neighbors probably rolled their eyes, but I didn't care. Every bloom felt like a small victory. Every petal, a reminder that beauty grows even in places where people said nothing ever would. Especially there. As we cleaned up, Emma looked at me with that curious gaze kids have when they're quietly figuring out the world. "Mom," she said, "do you miss them?" I paused, wiped the dirt from my hands, and sat beside her on the grass. "Sometimes," I said truthfully. "But not who they were. I think I just missed the idea of what they were supposed to be." She nodded, like she understood more than I expected. And maybe she did. She's always been my mirror. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "I'm glad they let you go, so I could have you." I kissed her forehead, blinked back the tears, and whispered, "Me too." Then I walked downstairs, lit a candle on the table, and sat in the quiet. My parents gave me nothing but pain, and I turned it into purpose, into a home, into a life, into love. Some stories don't end in reconciliation. Some end in redemption.